Hey everyone, it's Peter Kerr from Daydream Nation, and tonight I've got a very special guest, Phil Aston from Now Spinning Magazine YouTube channel. Hello, sir. Welcome to the channel. Nice to have you on.
Thank you so much for inviting me on. Absolutely delighted to be here. Thank you.
Now, tonight we are going to talk about Jonathan Douglas Lord, the keyboardist for Deep Purple. Jon Lord, in my view, probably needs to have a little bit more love. I think a lot of people talk about Deep Purple. They talk about Ritchie Blackmore, Ian Gillan. But one thing that everyone needs to realise, the integral part of the Deep Purple sound was Jon Lord. So I thought it'd be fun to get Phil on the show and just share some Jon Lord memories, whether it's a solo, whether it's a live performance. Put the spotlight on Jon, take it in turns and just focus on songs that we want to just put a bit of love on Jon Lord. So I'll throw it to you, Phil. Start off with your first pick as a Jon Lord memory.
Okay. Well, actually, I'm also going to champion the side of Jon Lord's career that kind of he was working on when he sadly passed away. Because I think that, as we know from the concerto for group and orchestra, Gemini Suite, etc., the classical aspect of music was very close to his heart. And he always, I think, wanted to, well, we know from as Deep Purple fans, he dabbled with that in his solo sections. He always brought in a little bit of classical music. So did Ritchie, but I think it was because of Jon more than anything.
Yes.
So my first choice is actually from the 1997 album, Pictured Within. This was his first classical album, and he was even signed to Virgin Classics at this time. And the track is Evening Song, which also features the vocal talents of Sam Brown, who he had a close relationship with via her mom. And I think Sam Brown's first ever experience in a recording studio was on his Before I Forget album in the early 80s. But this album, which he dedicated to his mum and dad, who had died quite close to each other at the time, shows a side to him to where he wanted to go. And I think, as we know, in early Deep Purple, he was everywhere. And before we went live, you were talking about the power of his Hammond organ in the first version of Deep Purple. But I think as he went through towards the latter years of Deep Purple, his role was becoming more narrow. And I think he was probably getting, maybe bored is the wrong word, but he, soloing around the Smoke on the Water riff was finding he couldn't break out to what he was doing in his head. Because when I listened to the music on this album, and especially where Deep Purple went with Steve Morse with the Now What album, when they became more prog orientated, it did make me wonder if they'd have had that kind of exploratory approach to writing that they had when Steve Morse arrived. I think they were in a straitjacket with Ritchie Blackmore towards the end. That would Jon have been able to put more bigger productions and a bigger soundscape to the compositional work that they were doing, because I think they could have where they went with Now What. So that's my first choice is Jon Lord and the album, the track Evening Song from Pictured Within 1997.
Nice. And incidentally, Sam Brown is known in these parts because she had a top 10 hit with Stop. So she was known as a bit of a pop singer in the briefly in the 80s. And I have got that Before I Forget album, and yes, she does feature on that particular album. Well, I'm going to go back in time because I guess my sort of exposure to Jon is Deep Purple and Whitesnake. So I'll start off with Mark I Deep Purple in 1968 with Hush. To me, this is the quintessential version of Hush. Hush has been done by bands like Kala Shaker, in these parts Russell Morris, but there is no better version of this song than the Deep Purple version. And I'm pleased to say that Quentin Tarantino resurrected it for the soundtrack of Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. It's a joy to behold and watch the film and just see that on the soundtrack. It's a killer song. The thing that I like about Jon Lord's keyboard works on this particular song, it's so heavy. He is really hitting those keys hard, and the basically the whole, he's the most valuable player on this whole song, and everything is focused around him, and he just holds it together. And there's such a build up, I think around about 3 minutes, where he's got one of the greatest Hammond keyboard solos. It's just absolutely sublime. And then at the end of the keyboard solo, Pacey comes in with this beautiful drum fill. I just get a shiver up my spine every time I hear it. It's just full of drama and excitement. And you can understand why this created a minor stir in America. It went to number 4. It didn't do any business in the UK, but for a period of time, they looked like they were the goods in America. But unfortunately, the follow-up album, The Book of Talsum and Deep Purple, didn't really follow it up. But Hush, I think that's got some of the finest Jon Lord Hammond playing, and it's just so heavy. And that's my first pick.
Yeah, it's got that like almost staccato bit in the solo. It's like which is pure Jon Lord, because I think probably everywhere in the world, but specifically in the UK between 1968 to 72, if you didn't have a Hammond organ player, you weren't really a rock band, were you? Unless you were Zeppelin or something. But everyone had a Hammond player. But I think especially on that track, I totally agree with you. The Hammond sound and the kind of vastness of that solo is just perfect.
Yeah, and it doesn't sound dated to me, this song.
No.
It sounds really kind of it's sort of retro but futuristic. It's sort of like, you can tell it's in the past, but it doesn't sound dated. Really, really big keyboard stabs. And this is in the period where a lot of his playing was so heavily influenced by Booker T and the MGs, Green Onions. That is such an influential song for anyone that was playing the Hammond. And you can see John brings a lot of that into a lot of the material in Mark I.
Well, he was a great rhythm and blues player, wasn't he? When the Artwoods and everything. So he just brought that along with him. And I think that's what, when you have like latter day heavy metal bands and stuff, that when they're interviewed and they'll say who were influenced by, they'll go back to rock bands primarily. But you listen to Jon Lord and say he was influenced by, and it was just like a huge raft from classical music to R&B to soul to funk, and obviously the stuff coming out of America like Vanilla Fudge. But his palette was so wide. I think that's what made him such an interesting player.
Yeah, absolutely. But look, a lot of people don't give Mark I the recognition it deserves, but I think that you cannot deny that the Hush song, that's a great cover version.
Totally true. Yeah, and it does sound absolutely fantastic. Especially the album version has a slightly longer solo, doesn't it? It's not edited, so that's the one to listen to, everybody. Yeah,
absolutely. All righty.
Right. My next one is in his rock catalogue, and it is Deep Purple, and it's the album Who Do We Think We Are, and it's the first track that opens side 2, and it's Rat Bat Blue. This was the album where his eyes were elsewhere, perhaps, and it was all falling apart internally, but he still delivered one of the best Ritchie riffs on that track. But it's the central section. Maybe because Ritchie was losing interest, he probably said, "Oh, you do the solo." Although I can't be asked or whatever. But Jon Lord just delivers that frantic, synthesizer keyboard pregios there, and then it goes into that kind of really fantastic groove bass between Roger and Ian, and then the Hammond comes in. So I just feel the whole song is just Jon Lord tour de force, really, of what he's able to do. He's given free rein to it's an opening track on side 2. It never really translated live, although I did see them do it with Morse when they first went on tour. But that version, I think it's got everything. It's just a Jon Lord masterclass for me.
Well, you've stolen my pick. That's one of my picks. It is absolutely a tour de force. I wrote down that it's like the middle section is like switched on Bach. Remember a guy called Walter Carlos?
Yeah.
And there was all the Moog sped up version of Bach. I reckon it's just like that.
It is amazing. It's just brilliant.
I'm not sure that he's actually playing it. I think it's one of those Moog sequences where it's just sped up. You know,
I wouldn't be surprised. I wouldn't be surprised. But you know, to me, that doesn't bother me at all. I mean, Mike Oldfield sped up some of his guitar bits for Tubular Bells, but I think it's John's vision that he visualized this in his head, and now they put it together. And then, of course, you know, marrying it with the Hammond sound and that, as I said, the rhythm section behind that. It's just such a wonderful, you know, groove on that song. It really is.
Absolutely. And, you know, Glover's bass, very underrated. It's just pulsing along and, you know, so much build up. Pity the lyrics a little bit trite, but, you know, can't do everything.
Yeah. You can't have everything. No. It's a great sounding album, isn't it? It's all the Mark II albums. I think Martin Birch or whatever they were doing, that one sounds to me, it's got the best sound really for me.
Yeah.
I just love it.
Martin's hit and miss. But with Deep Purple, he was on the money. Well, they all sound beautiful, that analog sound. But you know, even in a band's catalog like Black Sabbath, you know, Heaven and Hell, muddy, Mob Rules, you know, it's sparkly. I don't get it.
No. I'm glad you've mentioned that, because I remember buying Trouble by Whitesnake and being so excited about it, and read that it was produced by Martin Birch, and then getting it home and thinking, oh. Has something wasn't he there that day? I mean, so it just didn't have it didn't sound like Martin Birch had done it, you know, compared with other stuff.
Yeah. Interesting. I mean, a great producer, but brilliant. There is some stuff that is definitely miss. And anyway. All right, my next pick is going to be Speed King. That's one of my favorite Deep Purple songs, and that really introduces the call and response. So where you've got Lordy doing a little bit of a riff on the keys, and then Blackmore replicates it. And that sort of translates into the live show. And that was part of their, you know, well established as part of what they did live, where there'd be a call and response. I think Blackmore fed off the creativity of Lord. So Lord would improvise, because like Purple are an improvisational band, and Lord would come up with all these little riffs, and Blackmore would do a response. And here it is, all self-contained in a song. But it's a brilliant song. It's just you know, as a kind of an opening track in rock, it's like, here we are, we're actually fully electrified. It's completely different to Mark I, and it's a call to arms. But the thing that I like about it is just the Lord keyboard work. It's just absolutely wonderful, and it just matches in synchronicity with Richie Blackmore.
You were in Australia. Did you have the version with the kind of like thunderous crash beginning with all the, you know, or because I know in the States it just starts as the song. That bit they took off because they thought it would be too much for the listeners. I'm
confused because I've got so many versions. I had an Access, you know, one of those cheap labels, the Access budget label, and they had the very best of Deep Purple. It had a girl in a purple swimsuit, and there's a version of Speed King that starts off with piano, and
that's it.
All these different versions, and there's one version where you can hear that there's a mistake, but they've left it in. It's like a little bit of an edit, but you can hear, but it you know, it works okay.
Because I thought it was the first album I ever bought, and I got it on cassette. I'd gone out to buy Machine Head, but they didn't have it in the shop, and I was so determined with my pocket money to buy an album. And the guy said, "Well, we've got Deep Purple in rock." I knew nothing about it, and it was on cassette, and you know, so I thought, well, I've got my money. I want to buy something so I can go home and go to school on Monday and say I own a record, well, cassette, and I put it on. And it just starts with that thunderous cacophony of sound. And I looked over to my dad's face and knew that I'd bought the right thing. This is it.
It changed the face of rock. Bruce Dickinson said, if it wasn't for In Rock, I wouldn't be in rock, you know, a rock singer. He listened to it and said, that's what I want to do. I think that single-handedly inspired so many bands. Great album.
Great. Okay, over to me. The next one I'm going to again paddle over to the waters of John's later career. And I've chosen this one because the sheer vision of what he accomplished before he passed away. And it is from the Durham Concerto. So I'm showing this in case any of you out there don't know what this is. It's probably his masterwork for what he could have done if he'd gone forwards. It's got Catherine Tickle on pipes and stuff and all sorts of things. And it's the last track, Durham Nocturne. It's just amazing that he produced something as enormous as this. It kind of reminds me, if I can say this, like, in a way, the fan base, as we've grown older, our awareness and our acceptance of music that doesn't fit into what we would have done when we were younger. A bit like Keith Emerson wrote his piano concerto for Works, and it came out the year that punk was massive in the UK, and it just got panned as being like overblown, pretentious, but it wasn't really. It was a mark of genius. And this is, genius that Jon Lord was able to create something as big in concept, as well as being a fantastic soloist. He was indeed, and should be seen as, a very respected composer as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've got the live DVD where they found or pulled together the score of Concerto
for the Concerto,
an orchestra at the Albert Hall. I love watching that. Did you see that show, that run?
I didn't see that one.
Yeah.
I went to the memorial concert at the Royal Albert Hall, which was done a year after he passed away. So I was at that one when they did like a classical section first to kind of, to put a spotlight on all those bits of music, and then obviously the second half was all about Jon Lord, the rock keyboard player.
Yeah,
and it was fantastic, really.
Absolutely. I've got that on Blu-ray. Ladies and gentlemen, Glenn Hughes, and everyone just stands.
Yeah. He did a wonderful job.
Oh, he did.
He did.
But I was quietly hoping DC might have turned up. David Coverdale.
I was sat there in the upper balcony thinking, surely Coverdale's going to appear to sing Burn or something, but he didn't.
I bet it troubled you all night. You were thinking, weren't you?
Yeah, all the way.
You're on tenterhooks all night.
Yeah, it's surely at some point he's going to appear, but no, he didn't. But there again, nor did Mr. Blackmore. So, and I thought surely he would, but he didn't.
No, he's in Carthel Wolfenstein doing what he's doing. Anyway, this is a little segue to my next pick, and this time around, I think it's a beautiful song. Yeah, I love it off the, I call it This Time Around, and then it segues into Ode to G.
The G,
yeah. I love it. It was like a little piano piece, and Glenn Hughes was in the studio and said, oh, that's nice. And they sort of did it in one or two takes, and it's just beautiful. I think it's got some of Glenn Hughes's most pure vocals. Now, this album was very fractious in the sense of Glenn Hughes was in cahoots with Tommy Bolan. They were just really pushing it on the substance abuse, and they were pretty wild. But there's a sort of a serenity and a bit of a calmness. I don't know whether the drugs had phased out and they were there's just a moment of sobriety in this song and calmness. And I like it, the lyrics and what it says, and just a beautiful melody, and just goes to show how talented Lord could, with chordal arrangements, how you could just pick a mood. He's just very good in picking a mood, and I think that the melody line of Glenn Hughes on this particular song is just sublime. And that's one of my favorite Lord piano pieces.
Well, it's
this time around.
It's in my top 3 Deep Purple albums. And it's another example of Martin Birch being absolute genius, because that album sounds fantastic to this day. I think it's, Ian Pace is at the top of his game. I think at the time the reviews in the UK, some of them said, "Where's John?" Because obviously they kind of took a step back to let Tommy Bolin be established, so Tommy's everywhere. But you're right, on that song, it's John's, the spot, all the lights are on John for that record. Well, and also on probably You Keep On Moving is a good John song as well, actually, isn't it?
That's the most
That's probably,
emotional. That's the most emotional Deep Purple song. That just moves me. I just think that's the sweet spot between Coverdale and Hughes vocally. And every time I'm on a show, I always recommend viewers to check it out on YouTube. Whitesnake, when they did the Purple tour, they did some concert in San Francisco. Hughes came on, and it was like these two long lost brothers that had reunited and finally on stage and singing. And, there's been a lot of criticism about DC's vocals, but they were both perfect. They were just great. And it's just like two long lost friends singing that song. I love that song.
yeah, it's amazing, isn't it? Because it came out as a single in the UK, and I remember the NME said something like, "Yeah, Deep Purple have released a new single, but it's hardly Deep Purple, is it?" It was a really bad review, and I remember it started popping up on compilations, and because I was a lot younger, I was thinking, why have they picked "You Keep On Moving"? Why haven't they picked "Getting Tighter" or "Coming Home" or "Drifter"? But as the years have gone by, that track has just gone further and further up, and now I would say it's off that album. It is, as you say, probably one of the most emotional Deep Purple songs. The guitar solo, the way it's double tracked, and the way Lord sits underneath that, holding it all together. It's just, yeah,
it's
perfect.
one of the great what if questions. Like, if Bolan was still around, what would have been the second album sounded like? A lot of people think that album is like the prototype for Whitesnake, which I can see. There's a lot of the sound and the themes. You can see that DC is starting to become the DC of Whitesnake.
Yeah, you can tell. Yeah, lyrically, he certainly is. Yeah, and his phrasing and stuff, and his voice is a lot richer and more controlled as well, I think. So he was really finding himself, wasn't he?
Yeah, more confident. But look, this time around, I just think it's one of the emotional, just a very calm sort of performance, considering everything that was happening in that band. It's actually amazing. Did you ever see them in '76? Did you see Bolan?
No. Do you know what I could have done? But I was such a Richie Blackmore fan. The sheer idea that not only wasn't he'd left the band, but they had the audacity to try and carry on with someone else. This unknown American meant that I didn't go. One of my friends went, and of course the wheels were falling off by the time they hit the UK. So I got into Come Taste the Band after they'd dissolved, really. And then, of course, thanks to that album, I discovered Billy Cobham, and I got into jazz rock, and then I became a massive Tommy Bolin fan because of his ability to play everything. A bit like, in a way, he was a bit like Steve Morse, whether it's like, whether it was jazz, heavy metal, he could play anything. So no, I didn't go. And I think it's a shame that there aren't that many Deep Purple live recordings from that period that show Bolin off as what he could have done if the drugs hadn't been involved, really. Yeah,
absolutely. The last concert in Japan just goes to show that Jon Lord was really carrying the band live, because Tommy had he slept on his arm. I think it was drug related, and he could only play rhythm guitar. So basically you had Lordy carrying the whole sound,
playing the whole riff for Burn and everything.
Yeah. But anyway, sorry. What's your
it's okay. Well, my next one actually is Burn, and although this is my favorite Deep Purple song, it's probably my favorite Deep Purple album.
It is,
and it's always you always focus in on the fact that it's Blackmore because it contains his best neoclassical guitarist. That style he was just literally inventing at that point. It's fast, it's melodic, it's got everything in it, and the riff, the way the riff comes in and the drums come in and then the vocals are all sci-fi based. It's for everything from a rock fan from 1974. 84, 94, 2004. It has everything for you, but it also, you think when it goes into that middle eight, when Hughes does his that second verse he does, you think we're going to go back now into the riff again, and maybe Jon Lord will do solo. We don't know. And then they don't do the riff; it just comes straight in those big Hammond chords, and we're off. And I think it's just a perfect marriage of Blackmore and Lord together, really pushing themselves to the absolute limit of, 6 minutes of rock brilliance, really. Jon Lord's one of his best solos. It matches Blackmore's fiery solo that precedes it, and it just is perfect for that song structure and arrangement.
Absolutely. Well, I'm going to counteract that because I found there's something quite interesting. Like the next one I'm going to go for is Highway Star. And it's similar in the sense that you've got Blackmore doing his solo and then Lord doing his solo. So in Burn, it's the same thing. So
but other way around. Yeah.
They're absolutely. They're both 6-minute songs. Minute 2 and minute 4 is where they have solos.
Yeah.
So, and they've swapped around. So I think Deep Purple, some of their songs mathematically are quite symmetrical where they allocate the solos. And I've been doing a little bit of research on this. And Highway Star and Burn are like mirror images of each other. Very mathematical. 2 minutes, 4 minutes. There you go.
Yeah. And that's a very good observation. And
similar, all very classical, Lord. He loves doing those Baroque little flourishes. He loves his bark. And Burn and Highway Star I put in the same category. I just think they're just absolutely divine. But Burn's my favorite Deep Purple album. I did a show, controversially said, "Is this the best Deep Purple album?" And you get all these people go, they're all team Ian Gillan. I love Ian Gillan, but I just think it's the best album. There's just something about it that's just, beyond. And I think at the time, I think it's actually got much more appraisal over the years. It's one of those albums where if critics are going to pick their top 5 albums, it's going up and up. I think over time people are really reappraising that album as one of their very best.
It's my favorite Deep Purple album because it has my favorite track on it, but also we could say that the opening part of Might Just Take Your Life was that really rich Hammond sound again by Jon Lord, carries that great solo at the end. It has Mistreated on it, which is a classic song, and A200, which some people see as a throwaway song, has one of my favorite Ritchie Blackmore solos on it. But and of course Sail Away. It's got lots of light and shade, and I just absolutely love that album. So I totally agree.
And Pacey's drumming.
Oh gosh, and You Fool No One,
and
the lyrics,
He was being tortured apparently in the studio. He said, if I have to do this again, he was trying to get this drum fill and he finally got it, but it was just frustrating him.
No,
but it's just brilliant.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Totally agree.
Love it. I think we sort of merged. So I'll throw it to you. I think I did Highway Star. So over to you. What's your next pick?
Okay. My next one is outside of Purple and outside of Jon's classical stuff and outside of Whitesnake. It is Pace, Ashton and Lord, and it's the last track. It's the title track, Malice in Wonderland. I think for being a young rock fan in the 70s, when Deep Purple disappeared, everyone was hungry to see what all the ex-members were going to do, and that time we had Alan Freeman playing these songs saying, "Oh, this is what Ian Gillan's doing," and they played a track from Child in Time, and me and my friends are going, not sure if this is what we thought. And then they played a couple of tracks from Pace, Ashton and Lord, played Ghost, I think, Ghost Story and Remembering the Good Times, and again thinking, oh dear, because I wasn't ready. Because Ritchie, of course, was releasing Rising, so everyone was thinking, well, that's what we want. But as the years went by and you got your head under the bonnet of Pace, Ashton and Lord, Malice in Wonderland, you realize just what a fantastic album it is. Again, Ian Pace is just magical. Again, the production is superb from Mr. Birch. But the last track, the title track, when it kind of moves away from Tony Ashton and Jon Lord comes in with that extended Hammond organ, you think, this is Mr. Lord. He's still there. And I think, and again, he had the freedom again. And his background was R&B. He was probably having a great time. And it was just a shame, really, that the music fans at the time, we were too young to appreciate what they were trying to show us.
Those albums you can't see anywhere. they're sort of like disappeared off the face of the earth. Even record fairs, record stores, sort of like they're deleted. People have forgotten about that.
I know, it's a
Lord.
shame.
Yeah, is that the same in the UK? It's just sort of not spoken about. They're gone.
Well, there's a double version that came out, which has had the unreleased second album stick on the back of it.
Yeah.
But you can find those out, but no one really talks about it.
Is that on a major label? It's probably one of those boutique.
It's actually
reissue labels, is it?
Yeah, actually, this one was on Endel, a family member of Ear Music, so it's part of the Purple family. This is 2019, that was.
Yeah.
I think in Europe it came with a gatefold sleeve. In the UK, it came with a single sleeve with a picture insert, but it didn't sell. The tour was truncated because they didn't sell enough tickets. They poured a lot of their own money into it, and they just pulled the plug. But there's a little video I think called, is it Lifespan or something, which came with the DVD, where you can see them auditioning guitarists and stuff. And Bernie Marsden, of course, that was my first real exposure to him, which I know he'd been in Babe Ruth and stuff, but that was where I really thought, noticed him. But I thought it's a great sounding record. The fan base were too young. I think now, with us rock fans being older, if our idols or rock heroes had done something like that now, we'd be going, "Oh, this is brilliant," because we're more open, to this kind of thing. But to those of you out there watching this thing, Pace Ashton Lord, you should try and give it a listen.
Yeah,
it really
absolutely.
Is a good album.
Well, if I see it, I will pick up a copy. I haven't got a copy. I've heard it, but you're just very hard to get in these parts.
Yeah.
So. All right, I'm going to cover a little bit of Whitesnake. So, Jon Lord's role in Whitesnake was much more textural. He was
yes.
It was less solo. He was less up front and center in the sound, but it was he was like filling in the gaps and being, just very textural in adding the sonics. And I think in Whitesnake, he was the king of the opening riffs. So I'm going to throw you a couple of songs where I think his opening keyboard lines, just you hear it the first 5 or 10 seconds and you go, wow, I want to hear the rest of this song. It grabs you. So Walking in the Shadow of the Blues, I think he's, so you've got the driving guitar of Marsdy or Moody, one of those two, but the Jon Lord, keyboard, Hammond following the guitar line. And I think that just makes it compelling, and that's actually one of my favorite Whitesnake songs. I think it's one of their best songs, and everyone says David Coverdale's not a great lyricist. He is when he tries, and that is actually a decent Coverdale lyric where he's not talking about what's in the trousers. It's a heartfelt song. So I always it's one of the few.
It's very, very observational. Lots of young kids in that time could have identified with that, trying to get their parents to let them buy a guitar and see what they could do with it. So I
think that's one of the ones where he sets his mind to it. He can write decent lyrics. Don't Break My Heart Again.
Oh, yes.
So you got the chords. Yeah. Sets up the atmosphere of the song. Now, this is my favorite opening, Gambler. I love the opening to that song. It's sort of this, it's just this synth line. I don't know. It's got a lot of emotional gravity to it, but you're hooked. You go, what's this song going to be about? And it's just him playing this sort of, it's kind of a modern synth line, but I just find it very, very haunting. I'll actually throw in a couple of Deep Purple ones. Knocking at Your Back Door with the Jaws riff.
Yeah,
when you heard that, you go, Deep Purple are back. Do you remember when you first heard that song?
I do.
Did you have your hairs on the back of the neck?
I actually thought, Deep Purple are back. And the same with the opening chord of Perfect Strangers, isn't it? It starts with the keyboard. And that's what sets the tone, really. Because it doesn't start with an obvious Blackmore riff or anything. It starts with keyboards. Both of them do.
Yeah.
So it also felt that because in the latter days of John being in Whitesnake, he was becoming more sidelined as all the focus was on the guitars, and he was, and the image and everything. So I think when Deep Purple reformed, it was almost as if he was able to roll his sleeves up again and say, "This is what I do."
Yeah. I don't think his sound would have suited the modern pyrotechnics of 1987, and he did look kind of uncomfortable with John Sykes, because you could see John Sykes is a lot of flash. They were going into that more crunchy pyrotechnics, that more Americanized metal type sound, and I don't think Jon Lord's sound is built for that type of music. It's built for that earthy, bluesy type of rock and roll, which is Moody and Marsden, which fills in the gaps. It's sort of it sonically just fills between the notes. But when you've got somebody that Sykes, where it's just I don't know if it's like shredding, but just high riffage. Yeah, I just don't think it sort of suits that sort of style of music.
Yeah, totally agree. Yeah. Well, my next one is Lazy from Made in Japan, because when we started the show looking at Hush and that wonderful Hammond organ sound. All the other big keyboard players around this time, the Rick Wakeman's and the Keith Emersons, all the ones that were in the music paper polls in the UK, top keyboard player, they were all the same characters. They were all heading off towards the kind of proggy classical stuff, and obviously Lord was from that. But during this time, he followed as Deep Purple decided we are going to be a rock band, and I mean they were. We look at heavy metal now and it means lots of different things, but in the music press then they were labeled as a heavy metal band, and Jon Lord was able to turn the sound of his Hammond organ into something that was not like anything else that you were hearing from any other Hammond or keyboard player. Maybe Ken Hensley a little bit, but really he was at the forefront of creating something that was just massive. And I know Lazy Off Machine Head is his showcase, but I think it's on Made in Japan where all those discordant chords and sounds and pushing things that takes it somewhere totally different. It makes it exciting, because I remember for a lot of rock fans, it was all guitars, riffs, solos. And here was a guy still making the keyboard sound really cool
and heavy
and really heavy, distorted, discordant. I mean, also still on that same record on side 4, with the whole of side 4 being devoted to space trucking, his solo piece on there, which is just out of this world. Even to this day, it's like really dangerous sounding music, because you don't know whether it's going to work or not. The way that they're playing, it's all kind of on the edge. Well, if you play the other nights from the same tour, that sometimes they got it, sometimes it didn't quite work. It's just genius, really.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, he was like the rhythm guitar in Deep Purple. He was just playing the rhythm lines. Yeah. So he was like in the bottom end. And even in Mark 1, there's a lot of, just listening to it, a lot of the lower Hammond was just sort of adding a lot of weight to some of those songs. So, I think that's well said. I'm going to pick, what am I going to pick? There's just so many. Fireball. I like Fireball. I love that little, that nifty little,
solo.
That nifty little chirpy keyboard break in between. This is another great song. It starts off with this sound that sounds like a radioactive silo opening up. It's actually the air conditioner. I read it. And you've got this, Pacey with this beautiful drumming. Pacey's drumming was just, I call him the Buddy Rich of heavy metal. Just these beautiful, just driving drumming and this wonderful riff. But I love that nippy little keyboard solo, which is like the centerpiece, and it just holds it together.
It's like an earworm, isn't it? Because it's one of those solos. I'm not going to try and sing it now, but it's in my head. I can hear it. I can hear almost every note of it. It was so memorable and fast and work. I totally agree. That's a great one to pick.
Yeah. What do you think of the Fireball album? I've always thought that is one of their most experimental albums. I think it's actually where they Blackmore uses a lot of harmonics and effects. A lot of people don't like it, but I think it's one of their most daring and experimental albums.
I totally agree with that. Now, at the time, I found it hard to access. I got to remember that I bought In Rock first, purely because I couldn't get hold of Machine Head. And then that Christmas, I think my parents bought me Machine Head and Made in Japan. And then the following year, I got Who Do We Think We Are? And then I started to, as my pocket money increased, to try and go back and find the bits I'd missed. And so Fireball was one of them. And obviously the single I thought was great. And then No, No, No came on, and it kind of felt a little bit overlong when I was younger. But of course, that has a wonderful Jon Lord solo in with that wonderful Roger Glover bass line and pacey behind it. It almost now sounds to me, I've said this to other people, I said it sounds like Deep Purple's kind of like a very prog album. People say it's not prog, but it's a way how you determine prog. To me, progressive music it didn't mean you had lots of time changes. It meant that you were trying things out that were outside of the norm of what people might expect from you. And I think on that album, Purple were thinking, well, we've done in rock, so let's do something a bit different. And Fools, again, that lovely Hammond organ rising behind the guitar, the volume effect on Blackmore's guitar. It's totally unlike anything else in the catalogue, isn't it? And No One Came. As again, lyrically, it's observational, it's funny. The only, of course, and the Mule, which became a drum solo, but the solo on that is wonderful. So yeah, I really like it now, and I think because it's not, it turns left when you think it's going to turn right. There's more interest in it. There's more things to discover in it. My only thing I feel is that anyone's daughter maybe should have been shelved, and they should have put on Strange Kind of Woman that would be my only observation, I guess.
That's a great single, that Strange Kind of Woman. It absolutely swings. And that's another thing about people forget about Deep Purple live. They swing.
Yeah.
They've got a bit of a groove going. They're not
R&B thing, isn't it? Yeah.
They're not four on the floor rock and roll. There's bit of a swing to it. And that one out of all of it does swing. I think the reason why they didn't put it on the album is it's probably too close by cousins to Demon's Eye. I always put those two songs like in a subset. They're very close to each other. But just going back to Fools, I love where Blackmore is using the harmonics and all these little textural effects. Yeah. So this guy is a curious guitar player. He's just really pushing the boundaries, and that's what I like about this album. They could have just done In Rock Part 2, but they decided that let's do an experimental album. It went to number 1 anyway in the UK. I think there was so much goodwill.
It did, and there were lots of outtakes from this, weren't there? I think on the anniversary CD, there's a track called, is it Slow Train, which is a very good song. So I know there were other ones like Freedom, which weren't so strong, but I thought Slow Train was an interesting song.
Yeah, absolutely. Have you got any other Jon Lord ones that you want to spotlight?
I think we've done the 5 and the 2 extras. I think.
Any honourable mentions?
Honourable mentions would be my 2 honourable mentions probably would be. I've thought about this actually. I was waiting to where you go and ask. It's actually quite tricky, so I'll just mention 3 of them and see what you think. One would be Hard Loving Man from In Rock, because the solo from Jon Lord is so aggressive and so unlike a keyboard. It's and the other one would be from Mark 1, which would be April, which is like a little mini classical piece, and the other one would be Bark Onto This from Before You Forget.
Yes, I was going to do that. Listening to the wonderful Cozy Powell playing against a Bach melody. Oh, God bless Cozy. We all miss him.
Yeah, we do indeed.
Oh dear. Honourable mentions is The Shield. It's not called The Shield, it's called Shield. I really like that song. That's a little bit of a side classic. But the thing that hooks that song is Jon Lord's melody. He does this beautiful little piano line all the way through it. And
good one.
this really psycho guitar riff lead break at like 3 or 4 minutes into it, and Richie's using all these effects pedals, and again he's just finding himself. So I think that's a little bit of a classic
Totally
song.
agree, yeah.
And I'm going to go off Slaves and Masters. The cut runs deep. I think that's got a little bit of a groove to it. That swings.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean,
I don't mind that song.
I love that song. I think that's the one with the most purplish riff on it from that album. I do like that record. I thought it was closer to Burn and Stormbringer than the others in respect to Purple. But no, I've always liked that. Yeah. I thought Blackmore held back too much in wicked ways. I thought he was going to really let go of the rail and go for it, but he didn't. But I do like that album. I even like the ballad. I even like the ballad, which is Jon Lord. He's there with all these lush synthesizer sounds. I do like it. Yeah. Good choice.
Well, I've got a theory that Richie said that when he was, he had all these keyboardists in Rainbow. You had Tony Carey, you had David Stone, et cetera, et cetera. He said, I was always looking for Jon Lord. And I think he finally got the best of both worlds in Slave and Masters. He got Deep Rainbow. So he got that rainbow sound, and he had Jon Lord playing on it. So I think he finally got his wish on that one album. And you asked Richie Blackmore what his favourite albums are. He says In Rock, Machine Head, Burn, and he says Slaves and Masters. And I think he says Perfect Strangers as well. But he really rates that very highly. But it just didn't do any business.
I think the one I'd just like to mention before we finish is probably Perpendicular for Jon Lord, because of that had those Castle Full of Rascals and stuff tracks where him and Morse do those kind of battle runs. And it was the first time I think Jon Lord had done that kind of thing we were talking about, the way he worked with Blackmore. It felt like that was the first time he'd done that since the 70s, that kind of question and answer racing across the instrument towards each other. There's I think 2 or 3 tracks on that album where that happens. And also Jon Lord is so high in the mix on Perpendicular. He really is a kind of like a lead instrumentalist rather than kind of a backing instrumentalist, which is where I felt he'd become.
Absolutely.
In latter-day Purple.
Absolutely. And before we finish, just live memories, like my personal perspective, I've seen Deep Purple a stack of times. He always, when he was in Australia, he'd always play some sort of music, a melody, like if it was Waltzing Matilda or some sort of Australian well-known song. And I've listened to a lot of bootlegs, and no matter what country he's in, he always brings a little bit of local flavour, and the crowd would go wild. Like in Germany, he'd do Ferrelese, the Beethoven. Do you have any fond Jon Lord live memories? Anything, whether he's tilting the Hammond up and down or attacking the keyboard?
My earliest one would be actually all the way back to the Burn tour, when he came on and introduced the new band, because obviously for me it was my first concert, but for a lot of people in the audience it was the first time seeing David Coverdale and Glenn Hughes instead of Gillan and Glover. And obviously he had a very kind of Radio 4 voice, very kind of, posh, didn't sound like a rock kid from the streets, and in the way he introduced the bands and everything. And then of course he went back and they did You Fool No One, and You Fool No One was when played live, had that huge keyboard introduction, which started like the classical motifs, then a little bit of synthesizers, and then he went round and you weren't quite sure where he was going to go, and then it kind of builds up with those layers of big chords, and now that the song's going to start, and he pushes the Hammond organ forward and his thighs underneath it, so he's rocking it backwards and forwards. Then Ian Pace comes in, and then Richie Blackmore creates that new riff from that riff, like a stick. It kind of play on the Live in London album. The introduction to You Fool No One was unique to that, I think. He used it again on Still I'm Sad, didn't he? The same kind of thing, but that is it really. And so you always knew whether it was Purple or Whitesnake. I remember seeing Whitesnake on the Ready and Willing tour, and again, Lord had a solo spot, and Coverdale would just say, Mr. Jon Lord, and wander off stage, and you just knew as the lights dimmed and shone onto the Hammond that this was going to be Jon Lord's piece. And he'd play around with bits from Burnt Wood, from Before I Forget. There were all sorts of little things he pulled in from his solo things, really. He used a bit of like electronic drums sometimes to play along to. But yeah, wonderful moments. He was seen as the guy. I think there was a warmth towards him on stage. Coverdale, I'm thinking Whitesnake now, or Purple, I suppose. But, you know, the bombastic nature of David Coverdale and thrusting his hips into the audience and all the rest of it. But there's something about Jon Lord, there was a warmth to him, like a friendly uncle. He was he was seen as we have Jon Lord, you know, Mr. Lord. And then it was, you know, and you just kind of felt a warmth towards him. And I think you're right, he doesn't get talked about enough, but those that do talk about him seriously love his music and everything he's ever done.
Absolutely. I saw Rainbow at the O2, you know, found an excuse to take my wife and kid to England, and got to see Richie before it's too late. And part of the show, they had a little bit of a spotlight on Jon Lord, and the photo came up, and everyone, you know, it was almost, you know, dabbing their eyes. It was quite emotional. And Ronnie James Dio, of course, the photo came on. But Richie, for all his you know, flaws, I think he's always spoke the world of Jon Lord, and I think there was definitely a very strong emotional connection. And I think probably when Lord passed away, there was absolutely no chance that Richie would ever get back in the Deep Purple fold. It's just not quite the same, really, is it?
No, I do think over the years he missed, as you said earlier, I think he missed Jon Lord as having that foil to kind of play against. And I think also Blackmore might have been seen the person who was the catalyst for a lot of the riffs and stuff, but I think he relied on Jon Lord to help with the arrangements and to speed up the songwriting process, really. And he never really captured that again.
Yeah, and he was probably, personality-wise, he was the right foil in the band, because you had all these distinct personalities. He was sort of the one, I could imagine the calming influence, you know, the person that is kind of the glue that holds it all together.
Well, he was older than them all, wasn't he? And he had more experience than all of them. You know, and I think he was very much a gentleman. The fact because I think when the Concerto for Group and Orchestra came out, when it says composed by Jon Lord in big letters as big as the word Deep Purple almost, he must have made him feel a bit awkward, knowing that Richie would be thinking, well, we're supposed to be all in this together, and now we're going out under Jon Lord's thing with Deep Purple backing him. And I think, you know, Lord actually could see that Blackmore had got the main spark for this new direction of where music could be going. And I think he was very much the diplomat in every version of Deep Purple, popping off to see David Coverdale when he was nervous about singing, sorting out Glenn Hughes with his drugs and stuff. I think he was the man behind the scenes, trying to keep it all together, as you say. Yeah,
I think Glenn wore him down, though. I think Jon was quite. I think Jon was ticked off for quite some time, but they made amends towards the end. But what was that? I think it was an interview. He said Deep Purple was fine until Glenn Hughes went to live on the moon. On that note, lovely having you on the show, Phil. We've got to do this again. Deep Purple's one of my favorite bands. I'm a Deep Purple tragic, and I could just flap the gums for hours, because I just think it's a bottomless pit. There's always some angle in the Deep Purple family. But folks, check out Phil on his wonderful YouTube channel now, Spinning Magazine. It's got lots of fantastic content and interviews. And
lots of interviews. Got lots of interviews coming up as well.
And you may have seen us on a little show called The Sea of Tranquility, that show that we did about a month ago, which is a bit of a blockbuster. I think it's 30,000 views and counting. Anyway.
Is it really?
Wow. I don't know. It's done pretty well.
It's done well.
It's done really well. But folks, please like and subscribe to Rock Daydream Nation. Tell us what you think your favorite Jon Lord memories, Deep Purple songs, Deep Purple albums. But one thing's for sure, you'll probably see me and Phil on a show.
You certainly will. I hope so. Thank you very much. Thank you.